In 2005, a Romanian nun named Irina believed that she could hear the whispers of Satan. She would break out into maniacal laughter during church services. She would burst into fits of violence and mumble to herself so often that the other nuns believed she must be possessed by demons or worse, Satan himself. But the true horror was never with the devil. Instead, it was in the hands of a priest who put Irina through a torturous exorcism to rid her of demons that never even existed. Irina soon found herself trapped in the isolated hilltop monastery. The priest ordered the nuns to tie her to a cross and deprive her of water and food for 3 torturous days. But they never managed to drive out the devil. Instead, they drove out the very life from within her. Thank God it's Freaky Friday. Today we're going to be discussing the Tanacu exorcism, a case that has haunted Romania for decades and exposed the dark truths hidden deep within the Orthodox Church. This series is intended for educational purposes, to document mysteries, historical events, and amplify important conversations. All opinions stated are mine alone. Before we get into the episode, I just want to thank our sponsor for making this video possible, NordVPN. If you know me and you know this channel, you already know how hard I ride for NordVPN. I love them. I never use the internet without it. You might have already noticed that I spend a lot of time online, both for personal fun reasons and also for my work. I'm always working remotely and working on the go, and you know the vibes. It's logging into the cafe Wi-Fi, it's logging on to the train Wi-Fi, it's logging on to any free Wi-Fi you can find on the go. But the thing is, you never know how secure those Wi-Fi networks are, and you never know how someone's trying to get to your information through them. There are fake networks out there, part of something called a man-in-the-middle attack. And while you are literally just going about your normal internet day, checking your emails, checking social media, scrolling on Pinterest, whatever you're doing, they are trying to get a hold of all of your information. Like I say, I never go on the internet without my NordVPN enabled. I have heard too many horror stories at this point, and it's just so quick and easy to do that I think, why not? So much better to be safe than sorry, especially in 2024 when we are so aware of all of the scams and hackers and all the horrible, nasty things that lurk in the depths of the internet. Why not just take 2 minutes to click on a VPN and then you're safe? NordVPN is incredible because just one account can protect up to 10 devices. I have it on my PC, I have it on my laptop, my phone, my tablet, literally everything. But Nord is so much more than just the VPN service. They offer so many extra special bits that I think just make them amazing. Stuff like Nord Locker, which is a place that you can put all of your very valuable, precious files and documents that, God forbid, anyone ever got hold of. You can put them in Nord Locker and you can rest knowing that your files are safe and secure and away from greedy little hands on the internet. Honestly, I could go on and on about the amazing things that NordVPN can offer you, but why not go and find out for yourself? And lucky for you, Nord are offering a special deal for you guys when you click the link in the description of this video. That's nordvpn.com/Eleanor. And it's 100% risk-free with NordVPN's 30-day money-back guarantee. So thank you again to them so much. We love you, NordVPN. I do just want to warn you that we're going to be covering some very sensitive topics today, including suicide, alcoholism, homophobia, exorcism, poverty, schizophrenia, child abuse, paedophilia, and murder. A very heavy one, so viewer discretion is advised. Now, let's uncover the dark and tragic truth behind the story of the Tanacu exorcism. At the top of a steep hill stood the Holy Trinity Monastery, looming over the village of Tanacu down below. This small, isolated village is one of Romania's poorest areas. There, the water comes from buckets dipped into wells, and the only light that they have at night is from flickering candles. Wooden crosses stand guard outside everyone's house as if trying to ward off evil spirits. It's a very, very Christian country. In April 2005, Maricica Irina Cornici was 23 years old when she arrived in Tanacu to visit her childhood friend, a woman named Angel. Angel had been a nun at the Holy Trinity Monastery for quite some time. Irina was coming to visit her. She planned on leaving, but she never did. Irina became a nun herself, and she would spend her final days on this earth trapped in the monastery on the top of that hill, isolated from the whole entire world. As soon as she arrived in Tanacu, strange things started to happen. She began hearing voices, she would break out into maniacal laughter in the middle of church service, and then she started having these violent fits of rage where she would lash out and hurt herself and others around her. The nuns were absolutely terrified, and they were convinced that Irina was possessed by demons. The priest and the nuns tied Irina to a cross and made her stay there for 3 days as they performed a ritual on her that was meant to purge the devil out of her body. But it wasn't the devil that had taken control of Irina's body. There was nothing that she could do to stop the priest from chaining her to a cross and starving her for 3 days. This man felt like he had been given the divine power from God himself to be able to drive the devil out of other humans. When Irina first arrived at the monastery, she thought she had found a community, and a good one at that, because she'd never had that before. She'd finally found somewhere that she belonged. Irina grew up in a village a lot like Tanacu. It was surrounded by poverty and isolation. She was often alone during her childhood and without a place to call her home. Maricica Irina Cornici was born in 1982 in Vaslui County, which is in the northeastern part of Romania. It's actually very close to the border with Moldova. She was the younger of 2 siblings to their parents. She had an older brother named Vasile. The 2 of them suffered very, very traumatic childhoods. Their family was very, very poor, and when Irina was just 2 years old, her father took his own life, hung himself, right in front of her. At such a young age, she had to witness something so horrific. Something you would hope that she would be too young to quite understand, but kids understand way more than I think a lot of people give them credit for, and it sticks with them in different ways, even if they don't know it themselves. Of course, Irina didn't get help from anyone. This was like 1984, she was 2 years old. People didn't think that she was all that traumatized, so she never saw a doctor or a psychologist. She never even really had anyone to just talk to and have a shoulder to cry on. She didn't have many close people in her life. She just had to deal with all of this pain on her own at such a young age when she wasn't prepared for it. And the devastating death of her father would haunt her for the rest of her life. After her father's suicide, her mother was struggling a lot with her alcohol addiction, and eventually it got to the point where she couldn't look after her kids anymore. So she left Irina and her brother at an orphanage. At the time, Romanian orphanages were horrible, horrible places. They had very little food to go around, no heat, there wasn't enough staff for the amount of children, so they weren't getting looked after properly. Irina grew up under Nicolae Ceausescu's communist dictatorship, and at the time, everyone lived in constant fear and extreme poverty. Ceausescu's rules were brutal, especially for families, especially for children. Ceausescu actually wanted way more children in Romania. He wanted to increase the population because he thought that would increase the economy. More people, more work, more trades with other countries. So to do this, to increase the population of his country, he banned contraceptives. He said that no one's going to be able to have safe sex, everyone just has to get pregnant. He banned abortions. He was basically all but forcing women to become pregnant, whether they wanted it or not. And this was only the 1980s, guys. And they went about enforcing these laws because it was laws, like abortion was illegal. And so they went about enforcing all these things by getting police to, well, secret police, to check in on women's health and screenings and things like that. Women would have to be examined every 3 months at their workplace to see if they were pregnant or if they weren't pregnant. And actually, if they weren't pregnant, a lot of the time they would be punished. Any doctors that were found performing abortions illegally were, of course, sent to jail. Motherhood became a state duty for all women in Romania, and they were expected to give birth to upwards of 5 children. It put a huge amount of pressure on young women, like Irina's mother, to have more babies that they just didn't have the money for or the energy for. They wouldn't be able to care for these kids, but it was almost illegal not to. And because of this, there were so many children like Irina and her brother that ended up being sent to orphanages because their mothers just could not cope. After 1982, right around the same time that Irina would have gone to the orphanage, Ceausescu was becoming obsessed with paying off the nation's debt. This drove the country into even deeper poverty and made the already terrible conditions in these orphanages way worse. Now, kids' emotional and physical needs were being completely ignored, and they were being actively abused in so many ways by the staff. At Irina's orphanage, the children were starved, they were beaten, they were abused by multiple corrupt administrators who stole money and food and supplies that were for the kids. These supplies had been sent as foreign aid to look after the children of these orphanages, and then the staff was just nabbing it all. It's just heartbreaking to think how much Irina and her brother and all of those other children would have suffered so much in those homes. No one really knows for sure just how many kids went through those terrible orphanages, but after Ceausescu fell from power in 1989, there were at least 100,000 children in these orphanages. How upsetting is that? Between 1966 and 1989, an estimated 15,000 to 20,000 children died in these homes. Died unnecessarily, of course. It wasn't any kind of disease. They died suspiciously in these homes. After the revolution, journalists uncovered his network of orphanages, and the images were just horrifying. There were disabled kids with stick-thin limbs that were tied to their beds. There were toddlers that had never learned to walk. They couldn't get themselves up off the floor. There were malnourished babies in these cold metal cribs all on their own. And there were even piles of corpses, children's corpses, laying on top of each other in the basement. These photos shocked the whole entire world, including Romania, because these orphanages and what had been going on behind closed doors had been kept so secret that even Romanian citizens were only just discovering the horrors just around the corner from their house. These children had been kept hidden, I guess because the staff knew what they were doing to them, and if everyone was to find out, as they eventually did, there was outrage. But the most awful thing we discovered during our research was that while Irina was in that orphanage, that same orphanage was found to be making CP of the children that they were supposed to be looking after. And apparently the administrators even knew that this was happening, and they facilitated it, they protected it, they never put a stop to it. Irina may not have been fully aware of the nightmare surrounding her, but the reality was so horrific. Honestly, the trauma that she endured as a child is unimaginable. The orphanage was a place of constant horror, and as she got older, Irina thought she needed to learn how to defend herself. Irina started taking karate lessons, hoping that it would teach her the skills she needed for survival. But as she began engaging in this physically violent sport, it unlocked a chamber of trauma within her, and she became a very, very angry person. She was suddenly physically aggressive with all of the other kids at the orphanage, even with her closest friend, Angel. She turned into a little terror, honestly. But, I mean, what do you expect? She is a product of her environment, which has never been good to her. Irina was always searching for love and affection and companionship because it had never been offered to her. Angel was her best friend. They had met in this orphanage. They both came from very rocky backgrounds, but they found each other and they found friendship in each other. Angel was the closest person that Irina had in her life other than her own brother, because they'd gone to the same orphanage. They stayed very, very close throughout their life, did Irina and her brother, but so did Irina and Angel. But when Irina started to unlock all of this anger from within her, a lot of it was taken out on Angel. She became a physical and emotional punching bag for Irina, and their relationship started to take a really dark turn. It became this toxic codependency, and Irina started to develop this very intense, almost obsessive attachment to Angel. Suddenly, their relationship was more than just a friendship. At least for Irina. She had grown romantic feelings for her best friend that she was abusing. And at the same time, Irina was dealing with a lot of internal feelings of conflict, and she began expressing homophobic attitudes. But this definitely came from a place of fear. I mean, she knew how she felt about the same sex inside, and I guess maybe she was just putting on this front so that no one would suspect the homophobe of being gay, right? Internalized homophobia, internalized anything phobia is so real. It's something that so many people go through, and it's so unfortunate that it ends up being taken out on other people within their community. And back then, homosexuality wasn't just taboo, it was actually illegal in Romania, which adds a whole other layer to that internalized homophobia. It was survival. She had to come across as though she didn't like gay people like the rest of her country just to survive. But she wasn't only struggling with her sexuality. Irina was also being haunted by the traumatic memories of her past. Angel said that Irina would often hear her father's voice speaking to her and telling her different things, and she died when he was 2 years old, so I mean, it'd be hard to even remember what his voice sounded like. But I believe that she was hearing these actual auditory hallucinations from a very, very young age. Stress and grief can cause people to hear things that aren't there, can cause people to go through things like this. And I think these were the earliest recorded or earliest noticed symptoms of her schizophrenia. And we'll get into the heartbreaking way that Irina's schizophrenia was horribly misunderstood a bit later on in this episode. Her illness was seen as this evil demonic possession that had to be fixed. In 2001, at 19 years old, Irina finally left the orphanage. She moved to a place called Banat and connected with a family that she called her foster family. I believe her brother was actually already staying with them, and they worked for this family as a hired hand in exchange for a room to sleep in and food to eat. And I think they would get a little bit of money as well, but it was mainly they got to live there and eat their food if they helped out around the farm, and that was a sweet deal for them. So they stayed there for a few years, actually, just saving up that spare money. Irina had a plan for when she had made a lot of money at this job. She was going to start a new life. She wanted to run away. She wanted to actually move to Germany because she'd been there on a couple of trips and she'd done work out there as well. She'd been a nanny out there and she really enjoyed it. So that was her plan. Earn enough money and then run away to Germany. But she didn't want to do it on her own. She wanted to take her best friend, Angel. I just called her best friend. It's giving history will say they were best friends, but because it was literally illegal at the time, there's no way for us to know if they ever actually considered themselves a couple. I'm not sure of Angel's sexuality. I'm not sure if she ever felt the same way for Irina. They might have been a couple. But at this point in time, Angel had become a nun at the Holy Trinity Monastery in Tanacu. I don't think the two of them had seen each other for quite a while because I guess Irina was working as a ranch hand with her brother with this foster family, so they were ages away from each other. But in April of 2005, Irina began to track down Angel so that she could run to her and say, look, I've got all of this money, let's move to Germany together. So they traveled to the Holy Trinity Monastery in Tanacu. It was originally it was built in 2001. It was a pretty new and pretty simple building. It was a concrete church with a silvery roof, and there was a very modest building nearby that all the nuns lived in. There were about 30 nuns that were living there at the time. So Irina gets to the Holy Trinity Monastery, she finds Angel, she runs over to her and she says all of this plan. She's so excited. But Angel just kind of looks at her and says, I don't want to do that. The Holy Trinity had this amazing sense of community that neither of those girls had ever felt in their life, not even in the orphanage. The closest that they had gotten to a community was each other. Irina had been longing for this all her life, and when she was speaking with Angel, she realized that it had allowed Angel to find her purpose and find her people, and she was so happy at the monastery. And the tables very quickly turned. Instead of Irina convincing Angel to run away to Germany, Angel was now convincing Irina to join the monastery. And she couldn't help but feel very drawn to the idea. All she had to do was show that she had very strong Christian beliefs, and she would get 2 free vegetarian meals a day, a bed to sleep in, and a close community that would protect her and care for her and love her. So even though Irina hadn't planned to stay for long at all, she was just coming there to pick up her friend and then she was going to Germany. Well, plans had changed and she ended up moving into the isolated hilltop convent. But within 3 months, Irina would find herself a victim of the sinister reality of the extreme religious practices taking place inside the cold walls of that monastery. Irina felt this immediate connection with her mother superior, a woman named Neale, and Father Daniel Petru Corogeanu. We're going to shorten that to Father Corogeanu because that's a lot of names. Both Irina and Angel were so emotionally starved from their childhoods that they began calling Mother Superior Mama and Father Corogeanu Papa. But Irina had no idea that Father Corogeanu's life was full of secrets that would soon show exactly the kind of person he was. Before he became a priest in 1995, Daniel Corogeanu was actually a football player. And not American football, real football, come on, soccer. But he wasn't really into studying. He tried to go to university, he either wanted to do law or sport, but he didn't get in for either of those things. And so he was like, shit, what am I going to do at uni? And that was what led him on this religious path. He started studying theology and religious studies. And within a year, he was fully committed to this life. In fact, a businessman had approached him from just within his village and asked if he wanted to help him build a monastery. Guess which monastery that ended up being? In 2002, they finished building the Holy Trinity Monastery, and a local bishop ordained him. For some reason, even though he was still in university, he didn't have any kind of qualifications or experience. Do you need qualifications to be ordained? He didn't have any experience, basically. He was practically ordained just for helping build the church. As soon as he was ordained, he dropped out of his uni studies so that he could focus on running the monastery. Father Corogeanu had this long red beard and piercing green eyes. It all made him seem much wiser, maybe a bit older than he really was. He always spoke with authority, and he could command the attention of any room he walked into. But Father Corogeanu was definitely not your average priest. He rejected modern science completely, and he was totally against unity and cooperation among the different branches of Christianity. And this did not sit well with the more progressive members of the Romanian Orthodox Church. He ended up butting heads with the local church leadership, and they were very disturbed by his unconventional style. And so they actually read aloud to him the church canon, which is basically like the official rules and guidelines of the church. And Father Corogeanu dismissed the rules, calling them 19th century innovations. They're old, they're outdated, they should be doing things the new way, the Corogeanu way. Apparently, he was given an official written warning to change his ways, but it didn't make a difference. He never changed. He had a very strong and dominating personality, which, quite frankly, frightened all the other priests. Originally, when it was first built in 2001, the monastery had a community of monks, but they all left. And I'm not entirely sure why. It was only Father Corogeanu left, and he was like, right, well, what am I going to do with this monastery then? He decides to start taking in nuns, who all became completely devoted to him. Isn't that exactly what he wanted? I always find it ironic when priests or other kind of religious people like that crave these very devoted followings. I mean, like, isn't ego or pride one of the 7 deadly sins? Did Father Corogeanu just, like, skip that part in priest school? In 2005, when Irina met Father Corogeanu, he was already a very controversial figure, and that's putting it lightly. He was attracting a cult-like following of the women, the nuns from nearby villages. Soon, rumours began to spread about the villages that you could find true absolution at the Holy Trinity Monastery. People claimed that they had been healed from all kinds of sickness or evils or curses. And Father Corogeanu loved these rumours. This was good press for him, and he really leaned into these stories about the church, and he became obsessed with exorcisms in particular. An exorcism is basically a religious ritual in which a priest or a religious leader of any kind will try to remove evil spirits from another person. That's it. I felt like I had more to say, but they just try to remove evil spirits or demons, or even, in this case, Satan himself has found himself inside Irina. Exorcisms usually begin with prayers and commands for the spirit to leave, get out of the body, often using holy symbols like the cross or holy water. Sometimes the person will have quite a strong physical reaction to this, and that's when you see like all the crazy depictions of it in horror movies where they start like levitating up off the bed and shaking and stuff. And they continue this ritual. They don't back down. Even if the person is freaking out, they continue this exorcism until the person calms down and they're peaceful again, because that is a sign that the evil spirits are gone. Exorcisms are pretty damn intense, and they're usually considered a last resort option when like nothing else is working. The Romanian Orthodox Church only has pretty basic exorcism rites. It's pretty much just prayers. That's all they really do. And because it's pretty much nothing, there's no regulations around it. That's important. So before 2005, exorcisms were about as tame as an exorcism can get. But after 2005, especially in these superstitious rural areas like Tanacu, along with some determined priests like Corogeanu, much more elaborate exorcism rituals began spreading. Already, a few priests had made a name for themselves as very skilled exorcists, especially in places where poor people tend to rely on the church for healing before turning to Romania's very broken healthcare system. People trusted the religious figures in their life. They trusted the priest at their local church to heal them. Father Corogeanu had read up a lot about exorcism, and apparently his favourite reading was from a pamphlet called The Power of Holy Unction. It talked about how witchcraft and devil worshipping were increasing and therefore making more people become possessed by demons. It said only saints can cast out devils easily because they're strong in faith, prayer and fasting, filled with the Holy Spirit's grace. Father Corogeanu devoted himself to prayer and to fasting, believing that he would become one of those saints as spoken about in the book, and he would be able to cast out devils from his nuns. He had this dream of becoming a very famous exorcist in Romania. He wanted to be the guy that everyone came to whenever they had a possession problem. And soon his dream would come true, but in the most horribly twisted way imaginable. On April 9th, Irina and Vasile were still at the monastery after visiting Angel. They were getting ready to leave. They were going to go back to their foster family and continue working, continue their old life. But before they could leave for the train station, Irina started having an extremely violent nervous breakdown. She became suicidal. She was hitting herself over the head with stones. She was rolling around on the floor. And as time went on, she was growing more and more violent, both with herself and with others around her. Father Corogeanu and all of the nuns were praying, begging for salvation, praying for God to save this woman. But Irina just wasn't stopping. She wasn't calming down even a little bit. And as time was going on, they realized they had to do something more. And so several nuns and her own brother held Irina down while they tied her up so that she couldn't hurt anyone, couldn't hurt herself, and then they threw her in the car and drove her to the hospital. When they got there around 11 p.m, doctors took her straight to the intensive care unit, noting that she had a fever, she was confused, and she was in a state. One of the psychiatrists treating her said she thought the devil was talking to her and told her that she was a sinful person. It's a symptom of schizophrenia, and she was probably having her first episode. Schizophrenia is a very serious mental disorder that affects how a person thinks, feels, and behaves. People with schizophrenia may hear voices that aren't there, hallucinations, or believe things that aren't true, delusions. Some people are actually born with a genetic predisposition to developing schizophrenia in their life. It usually develops when someone goes through like major life stresses, like trauma. Irina had grown up in immense poverty, in an environment of abuse. She saw her own father commit suicide when she was 2 years old. Then she was sent to an orphanage where she was neglected, where she was mistreated, where she was abused physically, emotionally, and sexually as a child. Irina's father had mental health issues while he was alive, so maybe that suggests that she could have had some sort of genetic vulnerability to developing her own mental health issues. Combined with her traumatic experience, this likely contributed to her developing schizophrenia. After arriving at the hospital, Irina's condition really wasn't getting much better. I can't imagine how scared she must have felt in that moment, because if she was in this episode, she likely didn't understand why any of this was happening. Her words were getting more bizarre and aggressive and scary, and this only convinced the already very superstitious community that she was possessed by evil spirits. The first person to suggest to the nuns that Irina might be possessed was actually a nurse from the psychiatric ward as well. That comment might have been enough to plant the idea in Mother Superior's mind that she was actually possessed, which, by the way, is so inappropriate, so unprofessional for a medical professional to pull aside a member of your family and be like, yeah, no, I think this is some religious stuff, not actually medical. After 15 days in hospital over 2 weeks, on April 24th, Irina was discharged and released back to the monastery's care. She was never actually given a proper psychological evaluation to confirm a definitive diagnosis. They actually just sent her back with the explanation of early stage schizophrenia. But for Irina, the early stage part just doesn't really make sense, because she was having very, very severe symptoms at this point in time, and it seemed that she'd been having hallucinations pretty much all her life. Like when Angel said that Irina used to hear her father's voice when they were in the orphanage as children, this shit goes way back. When they discharged her from hospital, they sent her with a prescription for a neuroleptic drug called Zyprexa, which is used to help treat bipolar and schizophrenia. But the whole discharge process seemed very, very rushed. It didn't seem like they actually cared that much about Irina. The nuns actually said later on that they never even received her discharge sheet, and the doctors never actually made her diagnoses clear to them, probably because they didn't do an official diagnosis. With nowhere else to turn, Irina returned to the monastery, and for a while, things seemed to go back to normal. The nuns, especially Mother Superior, began to help Irina by focusing on her spiritual well-being with love, fasting, obedience, and confession. Confession is basically where you tell a priest about all of your sins, all of your secrets, and you seek forgiveness. It's a way to cleanse the soul and start anew, put all your sins behind you. About a month after she was released from hospital, Irina took her communion and she became a nun, officially, at the monastery. Now, the details of Irina's story throughout this time are a bit here, there, and everywhere. Some people say that she was absolutely fine at the monastery up until the day that she wasn't fine anymore. Some people say that it was more of a gradual decline in her mental health that was seen coming from a mile away. After her first communion, her brother said that he saw when the devil went into her. And from that point on, Irina was exhibiting some very strange behaviour. She began to laugh maniacally in the middle of church services. It scared all the other nuns. They were very disturbed by this, but they didn't know what to do. But Irina just kept getting worse. Apparently one night she even set her own room on fire. She was back to speaking in creepy, strange ways, and all of this once again convinced the nuns that she was possessed. On June 8th, Irina went back to her foster family's home to go and collect a bunch of money, the Germany money that she had been saving up. I don't know why she'd left it at home, but she had. It was about 4,500 euros that she had managed to save up, which is incredible. incredible. That was a good few years of work as well. She wanted it back now, not because she was still planning to move away to Germany. That plan was dead and gone. She actually wanted this 4,500 euros so that she could donate every penny from her life savings, everything that she owned, to the monastery. Irina had obviously trusted her foster family to keep that money safe for her, but when she arrived, it was almost all gone. Her family, well, her foster family that she trusted, and she treated them like they were her real family for those few years that she was living with them, they had robbed her and left her with just 500 euros. Irina felt utterly betrayed. She really considered this family like her own real family because I guess it was the closest thing that she'd ever had. But to them, she was just some girl that was staying in their house and helping them out, I guess. But the heartbreak didn't even end there. When Irina went up to her old bedroom to go and collect her things, she found someone else was living in there. She'd only been gone from this house for 2 months, just over 2 months, and they'd already replaced her with a new daughter. This completely shattered Irina's heart. She couldn't handle this level of betrayal, and the shock just sent her spiraling back into a pit of darkness. After this, she went back into an episode of intense, violent outbreaks. She completely lost her grip on reality. With schizophrenia, any kind of stress or anything out of the usual routine can worsen or trigger a person's symptoms or trigger a full-blown schizophrenic episode. And it seems like this is what happened to Irina. All of that betrayal and heartbreak from her foster family had sent her spiraling. On June 9th, when she returned to the monastery, things took another turn for the worse. Her brother said it was so bizarre. 1 minute she would be absolutely fine, and then all of a sudden her body would go suddenly rigid, her eyes would snap wide open, and it looked like a dark cloud crossed over them. She was still having these violent, rage-fueled outbursts. She was being violent to herself a lot of the time, and she would mumble these strange things that no one understood. And the church, the nuns, were doing absolutely everything that you could think of, and even more than what you could think of. They were doing all kinds of prayers, rituals, they got the holy water out, they were doing absolutely every kind of cleansing ritual that they could think of, and none of it was working. None of it was even alleviating the symptoms. In fact, Irina was only getting worse and worse. By this point, she was actually refusing to eat or drink or sleep. To stop her from hurting herself, the nuns actually had to tie her to a bed with towels. Father Corogeanu did not believe that Irina's suffering was down to her mental health. He believed well and truly that she had been possessed. He decided that what Irina needed was not medical treatment, was not the hospital. She needed an exorcism. Later, he even said, "You can't take the devil out of people with pills." On June 12th and 13th, Father Corogeanu and 4 nuns named Edina, Elena, Simona, and the Mother Superior shackled Irina to a makeshift cross and carried her into the main church like she was Jesus. Inside, the nuns chained her to a board with her arms stretched out across the crossbeam. She was bound and gagged while Father Corogeanu performed the exorcism. They all prayed over her, they would pour holy water over her lips. At one point, they even shoved a towel in her mouth to stop her from doing all of these nonsensical mumblings that they felt were like cursing them as they were trying to pray for her. She was kept inside that church, chained to whatever she was chained to at this point, with no food or water for 3 days. In fact, the only water that she could actually get a hold of was when they would pour the holy water over her lips. She could lick her lips, and that was about it. They were torturing her. She had no control over her own body, and she was forced to hold that position on that cross for nearly 72 hours. Irina was already suffering, clearly. She was hurting herself because of the awful things that must have been going on in her mind, but instead of helping her, they just added to that suffering by chaining her up and starving her. But the nuns truly believed that they had to save her soul at any cost. On the morning of June 15th, the church was expecting a lot of villagers to come by for the service. And so, well, they had to do something about Irina, the girl that is chained to a cross in the middle of the church. So they dragged her back to the nuns' quarters and they took her off the cross. They took the chains from around her ankles and her wrists. And despite being exhausted, dehydrated, and so hungry at this point, Irina seemed to be improving mentally. She was much calmer now. She had stopped mumbling, and actually she was offered bread and tea from one of the nuns, and she smiled as they handed it over. For the first time in days, Irina was allowed to eat something. But then things took a tragic turn when Irina fell into a quiet, deep sleep. The Mother Superior noticed that Irina's breathing wasn't normal, so she tried to wake her, but Irina didn't respond. She tried to feel for her pulse, and it was very, very weak, and the nuns began to panic. The Mother Superior sent for someone to call an ambulance, but when one arrived around midday, Irina's pulse had vanished. They administered 6 injections of adrenaline into Irina, hoping that they could kickstart her heart on the way to the hospital. The ambulance rushed her there along with the Mother Superior. But when they arrived, it was already too late. Irina was already dead, and she was just 23 years old. The nuns claimed that Irina was alive when she got into the ambulance, and they blamed her death on the ambulance workers, on the paramedics that injected her with adrenaline. They said that she had adrenaline overdosed. But the on-duty doctor that pronounced Irina's death once she arrived at the hospital said that she had been dead a lot longer than the nuns were saying. He believed that she had been dead for the last 24 hours. They found her eventual cause of death to be hypovolemic shock, which basically means that her blood wasn't reaching her brain properly. Usually this can happen because of heavy bleeding or severe sweating, but in Irina's case, it was because she hadn't eaten for several days and her body was stuck in this one position. Her blood won't have been able to circulate properly. The doctors at the hospital noticed the marks on Irina's wrists and her ankles. It was clear that she had been tied up, and this threw a whole new spin on her already rather suspicious death. The doctor reported these marks to the police. In fact, he was the first person to accuse the priest and the nuns of causing Irina's death. The next day, on June 16th, the news of what had happened in Tanacu spread, and the whole country was in complete shock. When Ceausescu was in power, he had closed down hundreds of monasteries, and the people wanted them. The people wanted these places that they could go to and be a part of a community. And so once he fell from power, they all started popping up again, and this rush to return to religion was very fast and very overwhelming, to the point where the church struggled to properly screen and train new priests. This left a lot of monasteries and a lot of religious places, like the Holy Trinity, in the hands of very poorly educated people, just like Father Corogeanu. Because of Ceausescu, a lot of people had stopped trusting the state, and instead they put all of their trust into religion. They put all their faith in the church. They went to these Orthodox monasteries for spiritual support, for food, for shelter, for community, for everything. And the Orthodox Church became the most trusted institution, especially in poorer areas like Tanacu. So when that trust was shattered by this case coming out, everyone was so devastated. It turned everything upside down. Everything they thought they knew was thrown into question. Irina's funeral was held on June 20th in Barlad? Sorry. But that is basically the town that she grew up in. That's the town that her orphanage was in. So I can't imagine it held much peace for Irina. She had faced so much trauma, so many struggles there growing up. But now she had been laid to rest, and her painful journey had finally reached its end. 7 days after Irina's tragic death, on June 22nd, Father Corogeanu and 4 nuns that were involved in the exorcism, we already named all of them, one of them included the Mother Superior, they were all arrested. The police interviewed them all for about 11 hours before charging them with aggravated murder. Aggravated murder means that they intentionally and cruelly committed the crime, and if they're found guilty, they could face up to 25 years in prison for what they did to Irina. But this was a very, very divisive case, because a lot of people could see this for the abuse that it was, but a lot of people believed that Father Corogeanu and all those nuns were just doing what they thought was best for Irina. They were trying to help her, save her from the demons that had possessed her. A lot of people thought that because Father Corogeanu and the nuns thought that they were curing her pain, that they should be sentenced to or charged with something less than murder. It should be manslaughter because they didn't mean it. But Irina's literal dead body showed undeniable evidence of intentional physical abuse. She was shackled for 3 days. She was cut, she was bruised, she was disfigured, she had marks on her hands, on her ankles, on her stomach. Like, she was so obviously abused. Even if they claimed that they thought they were helping her, they were physically hurting her. And you can't defend causing serious injury or death to another person by saying like, oh, I thought I was doing a good thing. At least that's not how the law works. In an interview on national TV, Father Corogeanu said, only God knows why he took her. I think that's how God wanted her to be saved. And not gonna lie, that's pissed me right off. The religious victim blaming is insane. This is what God wanted. This is how God wanted your soul. He wanted me to become a priest and to get obsessed with exorcisms and then to physically abuse you and starve you and dehydrate you for 3 days, chain you to a cross. He wants me to abuse you to death, basically. That's what God's telling me. He honestly thought, or he honestly claims that he thought he was doing the right thing. He thought that, you know, this is God's plan. And because of that, he showed absolutely no remorse in torturing Irina because he believes it was all a divine plan. Irina suffered so much at the hands of this man, and he was in a position of power to be able to help her. But instead, he abused that power, and members of the Romanian Orthodox Church saw that clearly. In the aftermath of this case, Father Corogeanu was defrocked, which means that he was stripped of his priestly duties. The Orthodox Church strongly condemned the exorcism ritual that took place in the Holy Trinity Monastery, and in fact, they shut down the Holy Trinity. Of course, the media were going crazy about this case. It was one of the most awful things that had happened there in a while, and they soon found out that Father Corogeanu, or shall we call him Daniel Corogeanu now because he is no longer a priest, they found out that he never actually finished his religious studies in university. He was ordained without that, and people were not happy. And this forced the church to make even stricter rules for those that want to become priests, including mandatory psychological tests. The church had admitted that they were far too relaxed about who they let in, and this contributed to the tragedy in Tanacu. They promised to enforce stricter regulations, but Father Corogeanu's followers still see things very, very differently. Father Corogeanu still has quite strong support in Tanacu, where many people still believe that Irina was genuinely possessed by evil spirits and that Corogeanu genuinely saved her from evil, even if he didn't save her life. And in a rather unanticipated turn, Irina's death actually seemed to strengthen other people's devotion to the church. Corogeanu's followers still loved him, and they actually defended him more than ever. Some of them believed that Irina's death was some kind of big conspiracy against the church. Her death was orchestrated not by Father Corogeanu, but by the hospital to make religion and their church look bad. In fact, one of the villagers in Tanacu even said in an interview, they killed her early in the hospital to blame our faith. They believed that the government used this incident to unfairly attack their religion and put a supposedly innocent priest in jail, a man that they still saw as a true man of God. When it came to the trial, the courtroom was full of Corogeanu's followers, people who sat and prayed and cried throughout the trial because they felt so connected to this man. And when the verdict was announced at the very end, all of them burst into hysteric tears. On February 19th, 2007, Daniel Corogeanu was sentenced to 14 years in prison. The Mother Superior was sentenced to 8, and the other 3 nuns that took part in the exorcism, Adina, Elena, and Simona, each got 5-year sentences. But in December 2011, after only serving 7 years in prison, Daniel Corogeanu was released. When he first got released, he struggled a little bit. People didn't like him. He actually tried to go and live in a commune, and I think they just kind of froze him out. His devoted followers really, really loved him and really, really defended him, but that was actually quite the minority. A lot of other people were not happy to see this man around. So after he was kind of kicked out of that commune, I don't think he was actually kicked out, but he felt like he couldn't stay, one of his followers gifted him a cottage, a holiday cottage in this beautiful scenic area for free. Even though this man was defrocked by the church and spent 7 years in prison, he still reaps the benefits of the power that the church gave him all those years ago. He still lives a comfortable life and he is still very much looked after by his very dedicated supporters. And today, the Tanacu exorcism case has become something of a legend. The harrowing events inspired a few different movies actually, including the 2017 horror film, The Crucifixion. But decades later, to this day, Romanians are still suffering from the legacy of Ceausescu's dictatorship. Thousands of children had to grow up in poverty, facing neglect and lacking access to basic needs, fulfillment and education. Irina's childhood was an absolute nightmare from all angles, and most of it stemmed from this man's horrific policies. She was abandoned, she was abused, she was neglected as a child, and this trauma led to her developing schizophrenia. And even then, she never received the support that she needed. Instead, her case was left in the hands of an egotistical priest that had no training, no qualifications in order to help her, only a misguided belief that he had been gifted the divine power to heal her. Now, before we end this video, I want to give a shout out to an incredible Romanian organisation that has been working tirelessly for the last 30 years to support people that are struggling with their mental health. The Estuar community is an NGO made up of dedicated volunteers and very generous doctors, and they help those facing mental health challenges and their friends and family, their loved ones. In Romania, more than 75,000 people are registered with mental health problems, and over 3,000 of those are institutionalized. People with mental health issues in Romania are one of the most stigmatized and vulnerable groups. They have little or no access to social support services, and they are often ostracized from their communities and excluded. So if any of you are able to donate or volunteer your time, or even just read up on the work that this amazing organization does, then please do. I would love that. The link will of course be down below in the description of this episode, and I don't know if you guys have noticed, but we actually have a link tree that is always linked in every single one of our episodes with really useful information and resources on a number of different topics. So if you've ever been affected by anything we've spoken about in these videos, there is help in the description of every single one. There are helplines, there are places to go, places to donate if you feel like you want to make a difference. I don't know if I've ever verbally brought attention to the fact that that link is down there, but it is. It's going to be in every single episode from now on, so if you do ever need hotlines or you want to read up on charities or anything like that, the description is the place to go. In 2017, an interviewer from Vice actually managed to get an interview with Daniel Corogeanu, and surprisingly, he was very up for talking, but when it actually came to the interview, he was very cryptic. He was, I don't know, clearly just using it for like a bit of attention. The conversation was very, very intense, to say the least. The interviewer asked at one point, with a mixture of curiosity and dread, if he still performs exorcisms, and if he actually truly believes in the devil. Corogeanu leaned in and very calmly said, "No, the devil doesn't exist." The interviewer looked at him in horror, but Corogeanu just smiled under that big red bushy beard. As he got up to leave, he turned and said to the interviewer, "The devil only exists if you scold him." No idea what he means by that, but on that note, that's everything we have for this episode. Thank you so much for watching, and thanks again to NordVPN for sponsoring. Remember, they have an exclusive deal when you click the link down below in the description. That's nordvpn.com/Eleanor. Of course, it is 100% risk-free with NordVPN's 30-day money-back guarantee. guarantee. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a thumbs up. That would really, really help me out. If you want to comment on the video or share it, if you engage with the video in some way, then it tells YouTube that you like this kind of content. That way, I think we'll end up seeing each other a lot more. If you tell YouTube you like these videos, then it'll give them to you more. And I would love to see you again. I don't know about you, I've had a really great time on our date today. I'm joking, but yeah, if you want to watch more of our videos, there should be one on screen right now. If you want to subscribe to this channel so that you don't ever miss our future episodes, click the circle with my face in, and please put the notification bell on, because please, please do not make me sing Sabrina Carpenter to you right now. Just please put the bell on, put the bell on. Anyway, on that note, see you later.